show. I'm Eric Murphy. It is February 23rd. This is Skeptic Generation, and we need to talk. It's not just me today. We have a special guest, not just a guest. Let's bring him on. Dean Meadows. How's it going, brother?
Hey, what's going on, man? It's wild that this is actually happening, but it's awesome.
Yeah. So it was the first time we ever talked, I believe you had called in to Talk Heathen back when I was doing Talk Heathen, right?
Yeah, back in like 2016 or something like that. It's been that long.
Damn.
Yeah.
Damn. Well, so for people who don't know who you are, let's get an intro. Who are you?
Yeah, so my name is Dean Meadows. I'm a campus minister here in Virginia. And I just love talking about faith, religion, theology. And I've done most of that in the last 4 or 5 years with Eric.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
I absolutely love that. Just I know we've talked about it before on other channels and things like that. But this is the first time on Skeptic Generation, so I'm happy to share. I remember you coming down to the atheist community of Austin, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't remember when that was. That was many moons ago,
oh my
but
God, I think it was 2018.
yeah, something like that. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and just wanting to talk apologetics and like have conversations with atheists. And I remember you kept saying over and over, "Oh, I'm the lamb in the lion's den," or
yeah. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
No, I remember I mean, the airport story is always going to be an amazing story. So I needed a place to stay,
Yep.
and I didn't know Eric personally,
Didn't know
but
him.
I
Yeah.
Facebook messaged him and was like, "Hey, I need a place to stay." And he's like, "I'll pick you up at the airport." And I'll let Eric fill in the details. But we were
I
we were not supposed to rent a car, but we ended up renting a car.
well,
Um,
Dean was scheduled to teach a class in apologetics in a neighboring town, right? Or a
yeah,
in service.
there was a discipleship university conference that was going on at a church in Dripping
Hmm.
Springs, and I was there to teach on classical arguments for the existence of God. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, and yeah, you wanted a place to stay, so I go down to pick you up. Um, and you had, I think, originally scheduled to rent a car, and you were going to follow me back to my house. And so I was like, cool, no worries. I'm going to go hop in my car and I'm going to drive up to the car rental area. That way you can follow me out and we can go to my place. And I turned into the car rental area and I heard the click click of the they're those devices that'll pop your tires if you go the wrong way.
yeah, the spikes.
Yeah. And I realized I was in the wrong area and I could not get out. And I looked around. It was too late at night. All of the people that worked there at that car rental place were gone for the night. So you wound up giving us a ride to my place.
Yeah,
And we were so excited just to talk apologetics that we argued and had so much fun. We were like teenagers, just up
yeah.
all night, literally
It
all
was.
night.
I think we talked till like 3:30, and then we went into the studio and recorded from like 3:30 to 5:30. And I was supposed to
Yep.
be at the church at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yep. And you had to drop me off at the airport so I can go get my car
Yeah,
on the
yeah, that was
way
wild.
to, yeah, it was so funny. Um, but what I enjoy is, Dean, although you are a Christian apologist and are someone who's coming from the other side of things, you never lose sight of the humanity of the person that you're talking to. And you want to see those conversations had. I feel like as a Christian, when I was a Christian, I had this main character syndrome, right? This complex where everyone else kind of existed to be a part of my hero story. And that included witnessing. And so for me, um, I would treat people like projects for me to practice my Christianity upon and to impress upon them the love of Jesus. And then If I won souls for Christ, awesome. But often that came at the expense of really using people. And I feel like a lot of Christians do that. And I bring up my experience because I don't want to pretend like I was an exception. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
I never got that feeling from you. I always got the feeling that you wanted to get to know me as a human being and make friends with me and V. And that means the world to me. And so I'm happy to have you on. And what we've decided is this, because we have not yet released the format of what our episodes together are going to look like. So you're going to be
Okay.
on the fourth Sunday of every month, and part of the draw of these call-in shows is that the host has their finger on the button. The host can hang up the call. The host can mute the caller. But how fair would it to be to Dean if I was the only one who had that power? That would be really, really weird power dynamic. So Dean is logged into Colin's studio as well. He can see the callers that are lined up. And he can hit the mute button and he can hit the drop button at any point. So we need to either play nice with each other or get ready for sniping. And I imagine that over time it's probably going to switch back and forth. But I really want to kind of dive in. Before we do, if you like the show and you want to support it, oh, it looks like Dean dropped. This is what happens when you host and produce at the same time. You got to figure out what's going on live on the show. So while I dial this in, let me. There we go.
I'm
He's
good. I don't
back.
know what just happened. Sorry.
Hey. No, no
I'm
worries.
back.
I'm glad you're back. If you like the show and you want to support it, consider going to patreon.com/skeptic generation. That's patreon.com/skeptic generation. Also, like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when we're going to be going live and when we're going to be putting out clips. Let's see. Dean, we're going to be touching base again at the end of the show, talking about what we're going to be doing over the next month because it's really, really exciting, and I don't want to give everything right away. But are you ready to take our first call?
um yes. I am struggling with login studio at the
Oh, call in
moment.
studio.
Or call let's log in. That's
Mwah,
probably
that
so
means
call in.
callinstudio.com.
Okay, there it is. There it is. There it
That
is. All
means
right.
that
Cool, cool,
I get
cool.
to be the person to
Yeah,
talk
yeah, you do
about to
that.
pick the first caller. So,
Sounds good.
oh, right. If you want to call in, right? You can talk to an atheist or you can talk to a Christian apologist.
Okay, I'm here.
Let,
I'm here. I got it. I
cool.
got it.
Let
I
me get
got
the
it.
phone number up. The phone number
Cool, cool.
is 412 Skepgen. That's 412-753-7436. Or you can go to tiny.cc/Skepgen. That's tiny.cc/SKEPGEN. Our call screeners are waiting to take your call. We've got calls on the line. And we're really, really excited. All right. So since you can see it, who are we talking to first?
Yeah. um let's go ahead and talk to Tim. Let's talk to
I
Tim.
love it. Tim, you're live on the show.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Oh,
Can you hear me okay?
yes.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hey, how you doing?
good, good.
Uh,
What did you want to talk about today?
yeah, it's actually a follow-on from a conversation you had a couple of weeks ago. I was going to, basically it was about like the nature of consciousness and like the concept of an afterlife. And while I agree with a lot of what you said, there were some things I wanted to push back on. And it's more kind of meant to be more of an atheistic kind of perspective of it. But the fact that we've got a theist online, it'd be great to get your input on the subject as well.
I think we're definitely
So,
going to have different opinions for sure.
quite possibly. But yeah, so basically you're talking about last week how consciousness is just like a byproduct of, say, the complexity of our brain.
Right.
And
An emergent
there's no
property.
example. Sorry?
An emergent property.
Yeah, well, I would disagree with that. I think that it's probably an evolved trait. So, yeah, because the problem with that is, well, on one level, our consciousness, well, there seems to be parts of our brain that are both conscious and subconscious. There's a lot of like functionality in our brain that you don't need a consciousness for. Like, for example, just a basic reflex or say walking from one side of the room to another.
Right, keeping
That's
your heart
all
beating
just
without needing to think about it, and breathing.
quite possibly. Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
Your autonomic nervous system.
See, exactly. So there seems to be parts of the brain that there's evolved functionality in it. As well as that, you've also got it's it's not, your consciousness isn't just interacting with your brain. It seems to be, well, it's interacting with it, as opposed to just being a byproduct that's just kind of not quite vestigial, but you know what I mean, just an emergent property, like you said. But the thing is, it's not just there because it's there. It seems to be interacting very much with our survival. So, for example, say you were to put your hand into or touch something hot, for example. Obviously, your body would have the reflex to pull away, and there may be some sort of psychological aspect of it, creating an anxiety around that, so to make you not do that thing again.
Mm-hmm.
A bit like, have you ever been like somewhere high, and there's part of your body, your subconscious is telling you don't go close to that high edge because there's a very kind of primal desire to not fall off high things.
Right.
So it's actually physically difficult to go there because your body's telling you to not do it. But also, when you say touch something hot, there's a physical discomfort which we consciously are aware of. So it's almost like that is also part of our evolved traits to not do something. It's like if it didn't have, and it's one of those. I'm not sure what the technical biological term with where evolution being efficient. It appears to be like it wouldn't be there if they didn't have some sort of functionality. And I'm not saying I have any idea of how that functionality works
Well,
or where it came from. But that's kind of my argument. It's like, sorry.
No. You were wrapping up. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'm not saying I know where that functionality comes from, but I do think it's to say that it's just a byproduct of complexity. I think that's not quite accurate, in my opinion.
Dean, what are your thoughts? Oh, Dean, you're muted.
I got you. I agree with Tim. I think there's more to consciousness than just brain chemistry, right? I think that there are some. I think his some of his examples are. I think they could potentially demonstrate that. I think things like first person reflective views of moral decisions would be an indicator that we're more than just brain chemistry, or as one Christian apologist that you're very skeptical of, Eric, would
Brain
say
fizz.
we're more than just wet robots, as
I
some would say. So yeah,
I like to say
I'm with
meat
you,
robots.
Tim, on that area.
Like what?
What do you mean?
Well, what is not explained by?
So when I have the so for instance, when, and I use this example, I don't know how strong of an example it is, but when I use the example of a lion killing a zebra, right? So the lion kills the zebra, but the lion doesn't then sit back under the tree and reflect, was that the right moral thing to do or the wrong moral thing to do? It doesn't reflect on the decisions that it makes. Whereas we have that capacity to where when I'm thinking right now, only I have access to that. You don't have access to that. And even if they were to cut my brain open,
well,
they couldn't access maybe a dream that I was having while I was quote under, right? They could tell that I was dreaming, but they wouldn't know the content of that dream.
Okay, there are a couple of pieces there. I'm going to push back. Both of you, please, Tim, feel free to jump in as well. Or Tim, did you want to respond to Dean at all?
I think with regards to seeing what you dream, saying that, I'm pretty sure I saw a while ago, there is actually some researcher somewhere, this is a while ago, they tried being able to, I don't think it was dreams, but it was being able to try and reproduce what somebody's seeing using an AI. I think it was from brainwaves or something, to kind of be able to kind of reproduce what they're seeing from brainwaves. And the idea was then, could you use that on somebody who's dreaming? But I disagree with what you're saying with regards to, I mean, it's a difficult thing. It's like, well, where does consciousness stop and where does like the neural and psychological mechanisms kick in? That's the problem. So I guess it's like, I would disagree. Things like morality and things like dreams, I would say that there actually are more what's the word, like kind kind of like a difference engine in the same way that a computer works. I would say it's more along those lines. And I think the big problem is we have no idea what consciousness is. We don't even have any tools of saying this is consciousness, this isn't. And I think science will get there, but I think we don't actually. Okay, so say for example, how would you tell the difference between a human and a very, very, very advanced robot?
Are you asking me or Dean?
Both of you.
Dean?
I mean, I think you'd have to describe what you mean by very, 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 very advanced robot, right? So, I mean,
yes.
I think right now, you and I would be able to be able to distinguish between what an AI robot is and what a human is in essence, right?
Yes.
We don't
part.
know currently that what we do know currently is that robots are distinctly different in their nature or their essence than what a human would be. Robots are essentially products of humans. I don't know if that goes into the consciousness argument, but I guess I would have to know what you mean by very, 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 very advanced robot, because currently we can tell the difference between a robot and a human being. So I don't know what framework there would be to. Yeah, I guess you're saying, or you're asking, how could you tell the difference between a robot that is almost human-like, like a highly advanced android, and a human being?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of making a bit of a circular question in a way. Because basically what I'm saying is that basically everything that's identical to a human, other than the fact that it's conscious. But then if I'm using that to define consciousness, it's kind of a circular definition in a way.
That's a good catch.
But but it's difficult because that's the thing, though. We don't know what consciousness is, so we can't define it yet. Which makes it very frustrating.
I think we're working on defining it pretty well. I think understanding that
it
is not no, it's okay. I think that understanding that it is not a singular thing, but a complex thing with many parts helps to describe it. Dean, you mentioned essence a number of times, which is a really ambiguous word to me. What do you mean by essence?
So by essence, what I mean is, and this is going to sound really bad, but it's the essential things or parts that make a thing what it is. So, for instance, what are the core pieces of a chair that make a chair and not a car, right? So there's some principal things that are a part of a chair that make a chair what a chair is. There are parts of a car that make a car what a car is, and not a tree, right? So that's what I mean by essence. These key pieces, key parts. That's a rough definition of what an essence is.
Okay.
Right. It's a thing that makes a thing what it is.
Okay. So I can use that term. And let's see if we can go with that. So are you saying that essentially a lion is not conscious and a human is, by virtue of the fact that humans can use moral reasoning? Or appear to use moral reasoning?
So repeat that for me real quick.
Are you saying that essentially lions are not conscious and humans are, because lions reason morally? Or humans reason morally?
What I'm saying is I think lions are aware of things that are taking place, and maybe my argument wasn't so much for just consciousness, but more maybe along the lines of the existence of a soul. That's not what Tim is asking about. Fully agree with that, but there is.
But Tim, it says in the show notes that Tim wants to talk about the context of an afterlife, so it makes sense for you to want to set that up. So then let's walk through to that. You think that there is a soul. So do you think that humans have souls and lions don't?
Are you talking to me or Tim?
Dean, you.
I would say I'm not. I don't see. I don't know, because Christians can go back and forth about this. I know, for like instance, J.P. Moreland, from my understanding, believes that animals do to some degree have souls, but their capacities are limited based upon what we see about their awareness of themselves. So,
Okay.
I mean, I think my take is that I don't think that animals in and of themselves have souls, and that humans do.
Okay.
That's
So
my particular
no, I
understanding.
totally okay.
Yeah.
You're the one who's in the conversation, and so I'm going to bring this back where Tim can engage as well. So Dean, I just want to make sure I've got this right. You're saying that
Mhm.
living things can have consciousness and they can have souls, but those things are not those things are mutually exclusive. So in the instance of a lion, that lion is conscious, but it does not have a soul, and a human is conscious and has a soul, and maybe a
Yeah, I
robot
think
has
that's
neither.
I yeah, I don't think a robot has consciousness, nor do I think a robot has a soul.
Okay, so but you're
I mean,
saying
I'm just throwing that out there.
no, no,
I
no.
haven't
I'm just trying to
deep dived into
I'm
that.
I'm
Can
So
I
just
ask a
trying to
yeah,
question?
get
Sorry.
no, I'm just trying to make sure that I've got all three,
yeah, yeah,
with examples. So you're saying humans
sure,
consciousness and soul, lions consciousness no soul, robots neither, right?
right.
Okay, Tim, what did you
That's
want to
what I
ask?
would be.
So I was going to say, just a quick question. I agree that I don't think robots have a soul, but again, like I said, like there's no way of testing for not soul. I mean consciousness. I don't think because there's no way to test that a robot's consciousness. But do you think it's possible to make a robot that's consciousness, or it's just beyond the possibility, the reasons of possibility to be able to do that?
Well, I think that's a really good question, Tim, and I think this is going to be a really good inflection point for the advancement of AI and what makes a human and what's not a human. So, to be honest, I at this point I'm not convinced that you could make a robot have um, consciousness outside of setting particular coded parameters that you then insert into the robot, if that makes sense.
Well,
Sure. But
So
I guess I'll say with that is yes. I mean, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Because obviously I said I don't know what consciousness is or how to make
right,
it. But I mean, taking away from the whole idea of like modern computers and programming, just I mean,
right.
getting physical matter and arranging it in a certain way so much that you can create consciousness, whether that's through some sort of computer software or some other sort of mechanism.
Right. Do I think that 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 consciousness in a robot is going to be like an emergent property? Is that what you're asking? I'm
Not
slightly
emergent, as in like
confused
could
about
somebody
the question.
deliberately say, well, this is how consciousness works. I suppose you could always explain that to a soul as well, because this again, this is my understanding of what a soul is. It's almost like a substance in a way, not a substance as in a physical matter, but something that
Right.
has to be put into something and comes from something else that's kind of beyond matter. While is consciousness something that can kind of be a property of matter? I mean, emergent property, but a deliberately emergent property, something that you could
Mhm.
design into your like a robot, for example.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm currently not. Um, I currently don't have a reason to believe that a robot would have the ability to be conscious or have a soul. So, I mean, if you want to present, you know, an argument for why you think that might be the case, we can take it from there. But
can
I
I?
mean, go ahead,
Sure.
can convince me.
I just want to double check. I just want to make sure that you misspoke. Dean, did you say be conscious or have a conscience? Because I feel like those are two very different.
Consciousness
Consciousness, good.
is
Okay,
what I mean to say.
no worries. I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that
Yeah, yeah.
like
No, I got you. I got you.
okay. I don't want to gang up on you, Dean. So Tim, go ahead.
No, that's perfectly
Sure.
okay.
Yeah. No, I agree that I don't think robots are currently conscious. But then again, the problem is we need some sort of way of testing. We have a definition of what consciousness is and have some sort of measure or test to see if it exists. And we don't have that. And I don't think we even have a
Sure.
definition of really what consciousness is or an understanding of what it is. So we can't. I mean, you should say that about a pencil. You can't say that a pencil's not conscious. So it's a bit
Well,
of a frustrating way. But yeah, I do think. Well, my argument is I think that consciousness is an evolved trait, and therefore it's a byproduct of however it's some sort of aspect of physics or chemistry or something.
So
How that
can I
works,
jump
I
in
have
and ask
no
a
idea.
question real quick, Tim?
Sure.
So let me ask you this, and this is kind of I guess this is the problem with consciousness. How do you derive something that's non-physical from that which is physical?
Um, well, okay. The best analogy I think we have is the analogy of a computer, where you've got the physical hardware. We've also got the non-physical software. And software, do you agree? Like, I'm sure you would. I mean, do you agree? That
Yeah, I'm
I don't
with
want to
you.
put like words in your mouth, but do you agree that software is not physical?
Yeah, I would say that software in and of itself is not physical in the sense of it's comparable to hardware, right? It's code.
Well, it's a
Agree.
byproduct of hardware and obviously the code and the assembly. But yeah, the actual software it's more like a complex emergence. So I agree that well, I would say that software in and of itself is not a physical thing, or it's not a physical substance, but it comes from the physical. But you
But
could argue it. I mean, actually, well, because like a computer, for example, is an electrical device or electronic device. Um, but that's more of a means to an end. I mean, a computer is more of like a processor, works more mathematically than it does with regards to physics. It's just the implementation of it. So you could argue that is software a byproduct of maths, which is non-tangible, non-physical, or is it a
Well,
byproduct of the physical world?
I feel like you took an extra two steps, and I think
I
Dean.
apologize.
No, it's okay. I think Dean needs to pick up a place to answer, because that might,
so
yeah.
my question would be in your
Well,
analogy.
hold on.
Um,
I think Tim
okay.
had a question for you baked in there, or
Oh,
No, I
did
don't
he?
think so.
okay. Go ahead, Dean. I apologize.
Oh, I was just going to ask Tim, um, in his analogy of software hardware, um, and do you not, doesn't the analogy break down about um, consciousness being an emergent property from the physical, or strictly physical, or strictly material? Because with software and hardware, the way that those two things work is through an intelligent agent programming the software, and essentially, this is a rough understanding, inserting it or applying it to hardware.
I feel. Hold on, Dean. That feels like a dodge.
Well, that's not a dodge.
I
That's not a dodge in any sense of the way,
Sure.
because
I
in
no no.
Tim's
I'll
analogy,
well. So hold on. I can actually explain that. Sure. So something non-physical coming from something physical was the question, and
sure, and his
and and and
analogy
and
was
and so
of
his
software and hardware.
right. And so your answer is a god, because that,
I didn't
even if,
say God.
well,
I
no no
said an
no, but
intelligence.
right. So even if we were to go with an intelligence, I want to really compare that, an intelligence, with the question, right? Can physical things come from or non-physical things come from physical things? Because I feel like, I don't know. I feel I are those really, is that really the answer? So does consciousness need to come from an outside intelligence? Is that what you're saying?
I'm simply addressing Tim's analogy about how something non-physical can, my question was, how do you get something that is non-physical? How is that derived from something physical? And Tim answered with an analogy about software and hardware. And
Okay.
my only point to that was the example, the analogy breaks down, because if Tim, and I don't know if Tim's a materialist or not, but if that's the analogy that's being used, then the analogy breaks down, because in order to get the software and hardware to work together, you need an intelligence to do that, is my point. I'm not saying Tim's wrong. I'm just saying the analogy breaks down.
Yeah, okay.
If he's a materialist.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you, because I mean, my understanding of your question was, can something non-physical come from something physical? And in order to demonstrate that, you need to give one example, and the computer is one
Right.
example. I agree that a computer does come about through engineers, and I mean, one of the reasons it's a good example is actually because the computer was based around, well, not based around, but like it was inspired heavily by brains, and kind of, I think it was mainly Alan Turing kind of thinking, well, how does the brain work? What is a thought? And it's all these questions we're kind of asking now, but obviously 80 odd
Well,
years ago, so it's a bit more We've done a lot since then,
yeah,
but it's like they're very closely linked to each other. So it's the best example we have currently, I think.
Right.
well, I mean, even before Alan Turing, you had a lot of work on logic and
Yes.
proto computer type stuff happening that kind of built in. And the Turing test is a really good thing to bring up here, right? About something being indistinguishable. So right now we already have AIs that are indistinguishable from humans. They've been passing the Turing test for years. So your question about determining the difference between a robot and a human, if you're talking to them on a forum or whatever, you can't.
No.
We're already past that. Dean responded though about essentialism and getting into essence, and so that presupposes that you have access to whatever that agent is more than just talking to them on a forum. So I guess that's fair. And I'm trying to hear this all out and all of that. I know that we've been on this for about a half hour.
Right.
And I don't want to take too long, but I want to make sure you two have the chance to get to like a conclusion to a degree, or at least wrap this up pretty well.
Oh yeah, I appreciate the question that Tim has asked, and I think Tim's been a great first call for
For
me,
inaugural
at least.
episode.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah, no doubt. So I appreciate the question. I fully admit I'm no expert in at least in the Christian realm of existence of souls and consciousness and things like that. But it's a fascinating conversation. And Tim, I think your question is outstanding, and I appreciate the fact that
Thank you.
you've posed that question. And I hope that it's been at least it's been beneficial. It's been beneficial to me because now I got to go back and think about consciousness and souls and lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my.
Sure. Can I ask one question? Well, I'm not sure I'm opening a bit of a hornet's nest with this one. So maybe we can I could call back next time you're on the show. How's that?
Sure.
Okay, so just a thought experiment. What if you were to take take all the molecules that make up a person, for example,
Tim,
and that obviously that. Sorry.
let's pick this one up next. The fourth Sunday of next month.
Sounds good. All right, I'll keep it as a cliffhanger then.
Sounds good. Take care, brother.
All right. Sounds
Cool.
good.
Take
Thanks,
care, man.
Tim.
All right. Take care, guys. Bye.
What did you think of your first call?
Hey, I love Tim. Tim was awesome.
Right? You never know what's going to come in with a call-in show.
Yeah. No, it's great.
I feel like I've repeated myself enough on consciousness that that it would be labor things in a way. If you want to know my opinion or you want to have an argument with me, Dean, I'm always happy to have conversations. And also,
Right.
if people really, really want it, I'm sure we can find time to have arguments outside of the show and record it. But
Oh yeah.
I would love to roll into the next call. So let's do that. Who are we talking to next?
Go ahead. Oh, are you? Do you have anybody on? Are we looking at the same? I don't see. I'm new to this. Are we looking at the same screen?
I have Connor and Atheo-Pagan on the line.
Okay.
Do you see them both?
Yeah. Let's go with Atheo-Pagan. Let's go with him.
Hit talk. I want to make sure that you can.
I did. I just
callers.
did talk.
There he is. Hey, Atheo-Pagan.
Hello. How is everyone?
Good. I'm just
great.
Bringing your gain down a bit. There's a lot of kind of background. There we go. All right. I'm just going to get you dialed into the lower third. What's going on?
So, I just wanted to call in as your inaugural introduction to the show. I am a longtime caller, but I wanted to welcome you and thank you for coming and offering yourselves to the wolves as per the engagement that you had before.
The lamb among the lions.
Awesome. Yeah.
Nah, no lions here. We're all just wolves. Anyway. So my biggest reasons why I wanted to call in was that I am a agnostic pantheist. I do not believe that the gods exist, but I believe that if a god exists, lots of gods exist. And the reason why I believe that is mostly anthropological. When I am looking at the world I see a world that can be explained theologically two ways. Either that there are no gods or there are lots of gods. And the reason I say this is because we can look at various cultures across the entire planet and we do not see Yahweh appear anywhere but in one central location, as we would expect in a universe where there is multiple gods. We don't see other cultures talking about the same creation myth. We don't see multiple cultures saying this same name or these same characters. And also, when we look at the beginnings of Yahweh, what we see is a character who comes from another pantheon. He didn't just spring out from, by himself in a, very grassroots way. He came out of a polytheistic religion, became a household god, and then pushed forward to become the one god of a specific group of people. What I see when I read from a polytheistic view or viewpoint, when I read the Bible, especially in the beginning, it does read like a very jealous God being angry that he has to share power with other gods, and is basically making sure that he doesn't need to do that anymore. So like when we look at his engagements with Baal, for example, or when he gets very angry at King Solomon for building a temple with other gods within it, which is also very odd to me. If a king has a direct connection to the one and only God, why is he building other statues to other gods within that temple? Anyway, I'll break there to allow you to respond.
Yeah, so I guess my question would be, and I appreciate you sharing that. I guess my question would be, have you considered applying Occam's razor to the pantheon of gods, right? So it seems like you're in this territory of there's either no gods or many gods, but there's a middle road between those two, which would be there's one God that is substantial or sufficient to create the universe. Have you considered that?
So I think that a lot of pagan religions don't even believe in a creator god. Most pagan religions that I've engaged with, like Norse heathenry and the Hellenic religions, for example, do not believe that a god created the universe, that the universe was created out of some sort of chaotic primordial state, and that the gods sprang out of that, which kind of opens the road to allow other pantheons to exist within it, because this chaotic primordial state can create other pantheons alongside the pantheon that explains it.
So I guess I'm asking. Where are you on that particular spectrum? I know your name is Atheo-Pagan, so I've never heard that particular name or phrase. So I guess I'm asking, like, where do you fall in that particular spectrum, if at all?
I don't want the conversation to go off on a tangent about my own particular beliefs, but I will for the sake of your knowledge. Do you know what a secular Jew is?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm basically that, but for Norse heathenry. So I don't believe the gods actually exist, but I still follow the ritual. I still do the holidays, yada, yada.
So I guess my question would be, what specifically, because maybe I'm lost, what specifically are you trying to ask me as a Christian with regards to this particular spectrum of either no gods or there's a panoply of gods? Because I kind of fall right in the middle. I understand what you're saying about the Norse gods, and the primordial universe and them springing out from that, but I think Occam's razor allows us to shave off particular gods that we don't need in favor of a god that is sufficient for all of these things that may be covered by a panoply of gods.
That's only if you go back to the creator God part. If you don't believe, if Occam's razor could also go that there were no gods that created the universe, that the gods that the primordial state did.
Or just to put this out there, Occam's razor could
Yeah,
also
I mean,
be
that's
used.
the other part. Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, Occam's razor could also be used to say that a multitude of gods is more reasonable to explain all of the different things because no single god has to have that much power, and it's a smaller ask for numerous individuals to have powers than one all-powerful supreme being, right? Ethiopagan, you're typing. Number
Yeah,
one is
sorry.
impressively fast, and number two
Yep, I'll stop.
Dean, what's up? What's on your mind? You
No, I'm just confused as to where the conversation goes from here.
So I guess
Because
what I would like you to
there's
explain.
Go ahead.
What I would like you to explain is that this is kind of like a modified argument of divine hiddenness, which is that we do not see this God springing up elsewhere. We only see him springing up in this one location in a very explainable manner, in an anthropological way, where this God came from another pantheon, it became a household god, and then it became more popular, and it became the only God within that pantheon. And the way that the Bible is written does kind of allude to those beginnings, where there are these other gods that the Jews are engaging with at that time, Baal, Asherah, El, there's a few others that I don't remember the name of. And we don't see, like, if there was one God that created the universe, and is engaging with humanity, one would expect other cultures to have some connection to that, some sort of creation myth that exists that is very similar, has the same kind of names, all this other good stuff. But what we see are drastically different religions across the world, stemming from the environmental, material, and cultural differences across each zone. So, like, what I would expect if there was one God is that there would be a tribe somewhere. Like, I'm not saying everyone would believe the same things, but what we would expect is something like out of the ordinary. Like, in the middle of China, we would find this ancient tribe that also worshipped Yahweh. In the middle of South America, we would also see a tribe worshiping Yahweh, but we don't see that.
Dean?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you
Yes.
froze. I got nervous. That's all. Go ahead. I apologize.
No, you're good. So I think this is an interesting question. It's actually a fascinating question that you're posing, Ethiopagan. But I would say, in the way that the Bible is written, in the opening chapters of the Bible, the description of Yahweh is different than, say, the other gods that the Jews would have been exposed to while they're in Egypt, in the sense that whereas humans are products of the violence of the gods, and I'm going to get to your point where the humans are the product of violence of the gods. Here, there's an intentionality behind the creation of humanity. They're made in His image. Their bodies are viewed as, in the same word that's used for side in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, is the word for ancient divine architecture. So there's a difference in the way that the gods and humans or God and humanity interacts in the Bible, as opposed to these other ancient cultures. Now, as far as why don't we see a tribe in China talking about Yahweh, or a place in South America talking about Yahweh, and why is this only coalescing around the Middle East, so to speak? To that question, I don't know why that is is the case, but I also think that this could be a genetic fallacy, in the sense of that you may be saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you may be making the fallacy of that just because the way a particular belief arises, therefore it's more probably uh, untrue as opposed to true. So I don't think that the truth of a particular worldview um, is based upon how that belief system arises. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would agree with that, with the caveat that if the ancient peoples went through a global flood, for example, or all stem from this one, the separation of peoples, for example, all came from this one drastic change through the Tower of Babel, for example, that we would see these mythologies go through the people outside of just the Middle East. We would see, like, oh yeah, all people once were together, but this god, maybe we'd give him a different name. We were building this giant tower, and suddenly we couldn't talk to each other, so we had to go away. And now we're in South America or Siberia or whatever. Like, we would see very similar mythology between these different religions, even if we do accept the idea that they came from different, or sorry, let me go back. Even if they believe different things now, we would see similar structures of how the universe came to be, because they all were getting the same messages during the times that the Old Testament describes, when peoples were all together and when these drastic things occurred between them.
Oh, you muted yourself, buddy. Dean?
So I guess my question would be: would you be more convinced that these particular, or the religion of Christianity or any religion, was true if you saw similarity between, like, creation accounts?
If all creation accounts across the world, or I wouldn't even say all, if 75% of all creation myths across the world said, yeah, this one God that chose the Jewish people, they may even describe them as a different, give them a different name. Yeah, I would be a little bit more interested in this one religion that all other religions seem to point back to. Yeah.
Okay. I think you've asked a great question. I still think, just off the top of my head, I think there may be like I said, a genetic fallacy going on. But I think you ask a very good question that at the point right now, I don't know that I have every jot and tittle for, with regard to the question you've raised about um, these particular tribes in China or South America, or why doesn't everybody share the same religious view? So I think that that's a good point, for at least for me in my own study of my own religion, to sharpen my sword. I know a guy over at Faulkner University that has a PhD in ancient languages and ancient cultures. I'll dial him up and have a conversation with him, and then Aethiopig. And if you want to dial back in, we can have that conversation again. But I really appreciate that question. And I'm okay to say that, hey man, like, great question. I've got little to no idea how to answer that particular question with regards to different cultures and different uh, creation myths, as you've said. So great question, man. And I look forward to figuring out, like, whether or not that's true.
Yeah. So before I go, the other thing I would like to point out is that, especially in the beginnings of the Old Testament, God is never saying He is the only God. He's just saying that He is the only God for the Jewish people. And we also see that when He engages with other gods, like the Egyptian story, for example, or when He's doing the fire test with Baal. I think it was Baal. Was it Baal? Where they both sides built the bonfire, and they said whoever made the biggest bonfire would that's the true God.
Yes, it was prophets of Baal. Yeah.
Yeah. The magic wasn't there for the other side. It still existed. It just one side beat out the other. So even from my perspective, according to the Old Testament, it is admitting that there are other gods. It's just saying that the Jews decided that they were going to worship this one God who's very jealous, and it even says that He is jealous of other gods. That it does seem that He does admit this.
Hello? Dean? Oh, I can't hear you, buddy. It looks like
there's a connection issue currently.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, you got really fuzzy, and there's a bit of a latency issue. You're clearing up a little bit, so hopefully that it gets better.
Yeah, let me.
No worries.
Let me take Ethiopian. I think you're. I don't know what his point picking up. Let me take 2 seconds, Eric, and
no worries.
Try to adjust this real quick. And so, if
in the meantime,
you want to say a piece here to Ethiopian about what he's raised,
sure,
then we're good to go.
Yeah. So Ethiopian, you and I probably aren't going to disagree on very much.
No.
I from research that I've seen, and a lot of it comes from watching videos like, let me think here. Religion for Breakfast is a really, really good resource. Another really good resource that I've found is Esoterica. And there you actually have people with degrees in the subject who are talking about the origins of Christian mythology, and how essentially proto-Judaism sprung from Canaanite religions. And so you have the god El, you have Asherah, you have Baal, and that kind of pantheon that that mythology springs from is pretty decently understood. And it is funny that we can view the etymology of it and kind of help break it down a little bit. And so it's funny to me that we have this history, and yet it just doesn't seem to matter. But
it's ignored a lot by the Abrahamics, unfortunately.
It is, which is crazy, because it's the one thing that they all have in common, right? Like they all share that source. And so looking at that source and then finding that Asherah and El and Baal, and the subsequent rise of Elohim as a monotheistic God from a polytheistic religion seems like a bummer. It's definitely a bummer that gets lost. But I really have always wanted to have a someone who is a Christian, a pastor, an apologist, to interact with that, because I find myself in a bit of an echo chamber, and I want to know where they are. So I think this was a really good question to ask. Dean, you're back. How's it going, buddy? Oh, no, still nothing. Still can't hear you though. No worries. You know what? You disconnect, reconnect, see if we can get you going. I'm going to wrap up this call and start on the next call, and we'll see if we can bring you back in. Okay, buddy? All right. I'm hoping that's okay. Ethiopian, Thank you for calling
Yep.
in. I appreciate it, brother.
We'll flirt later. All right, talk to you later.
Take care. I have to imagine that if I was in Dean's shoes, it would be a little bit nerve-wracking. You know, you never know who's going to call and about what, right? We're talking about the nature of a soul and of consciousness, and kind of differentiating those things from each other. And then you have a call, about the historicity of the Abrahamic faiths. I feel kind of bad. I worry there are too many people calling on just one side of things, and Dean is definitely doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But I really, really appreciate it. And before we get into the next call, I do want to put the phone number out there because I'd love to take your call. I have a call screener who's waiting to talk to people. We do have other calls on the line, but you know what I mean. The phone number is 412-SKEPGEN. That's 412-753-7436. Or you can go to tiny.cc/Skepgen. That's tiny.cc/SKEPGEN. All right, Dean, things are looking better. You're looking clean. How's it going, buddy?
Yeah, I think it was my microphone that was actually making the problem here. I don't know what's going on, so sorry about that.
No worries. You still have a beautiful
you're good.
voice.
Do what?
I said, no worries. You still have a beautiful voice.
Oh, well, good.
It
I've been
shines
told I've got
through.
a face. I've been told I've got a face for radio. So,
Oh, shut up.
there you go. So let's go ahead, if you're okay with it. Let's
Yeah.
talk to Connor. He's been here for like an hour, so let's talk to Connor.
Right? Yeah. Connor in
sounds good.
Kentucky. You're live on the show.
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call. I'm not going to be nearly as interesting, I suppose, in the theological standpoint. I wanted to talk about gender abolitionism. Is that all right?
As long as you're good with hearing the viewpoints of a Christian and an atheist.
If it wasn't all right, Connor, we wouldn't have let you in on the show.
Yeah, Dean chose your call.
Cool.
So yeah, you're good.
Yeah, just to make sure we're all on the same page, do both of you know what gender abolitionism is?
I have an idea. I definitely have flirted with gender anarchism, which is probably the same or close enough.
Yeah, it sounds like it's probably synonymous.
Yeah. So
I haven't flirted with either one of those.
Okay, so I'm going to give you at least my understanding, like a rundown of it, which is like right now, like, or I guess it's better to look at past, present, and what future might be. But, you know, in the past, like gender is basically synonymous with sex as much as possible. In the past, it is, oh, we see one group of people who have this genitalia, one group of people that have this genitalia. They seem to behave differently. Man and woman, we have that. In modern times, that kind of the decider for that sort of breakdown in sort of like now with like trans people, it would be, you know, a man is kind of just anyone who says they're a man, and that's cool. And same thing with women, which I'm sure there's maybe some disagreement on your part with that, and that's okay to talk about. And gender abolitionism is basically the idea of like, these are socially constructed categories. These categories, as we move forward, don't really do much. Like if a woman is just like, yeah, I'm a woman, what does that mean? It means I'm a woman. Then I guess the point of it kind of stops existing. I mean, obviously it still brings a lot of people comfort, but like as a social, I guess like in a idealistic sense, I guess I want to know both of your opinions on like, what if we just kind of scrap the idea of gender altogether, instead of greeting you all as, hi, I'm Connor, I'm a man, but maybe I'm a man who likes to wear a dress. Hi, I'm Connor, I like dresses. Sometimes I like pants. Sometimes I like, I don't know, sports, but you know, maybe lipstick sometimes, who knows?
Speaking of, I got your pronouns wrong in the lower third. I'm going to fix that. I apologize. Dean, what do you think?
Thanks for that, Eric. So Connor, I see your point. Obviously, I think that this is absolutely positively kind of like where we are as a culture in talking about these definitions of men and women. Are they tied to are sex and gender tied together? Are they fluid? So I appreciate the call, appreciate the question. I think that you would be absolutely correct that these things are merely cultural constructs and that it would be okay to get rid of those if if God does not exist, and if, from a Christian perspective, if we are not made in his image, these similar but limited capacities, and if there isn't a teleos, a design end to humanity. So I think that
I
you'd be correct if that is actually the case. Would you agree with that?
Um,
Yeah, I don't.
I would say, I mean, how do I explain this? Obviously, I'm gonna think I'm correct, and I'm an atheist, so
No
I would
worries.
think yes, it's correct, and God doesn't exist, so of course it is. But I think even under the purview of Christianity, you can still somewhat have an idea of gender abolitionism because, of course, like at least under my view, like gender and sex are different things. And of course, this also kind of goes into what the idea of like what God has planned for everybody. But even under that view of like Christianity, I think you can still talk about sex. Like there are still people who have XX chromosomes. There's still people who have uh, the bits. I don't know.
Yeah,
um, you can still talk about those things medically, but talking about socially, like if a person wears a dress, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a woman in a gendered sense. They could still be considered like a female under God's view, but um, there
yeah.
doesn't need to be a social aspect, a social word that groups people together um, and puts people into boxes.
So I see what you're saying there. I think based upon kind of how you describe that as far as the purview of Christianity and still be able to hold to this particular framework for society, and I'm diving deep into my own worldview here. So this is where that's coming from. Um, God has created humanity for, or at least in part, for cultural engagement, for community. And so when he assigns in the creation account that he made them male and female, there would be a teleos and a purpose for that that ties that particular description with the design in hand. When he says be fruitful and multiply, that isn't just a a a cultural statement. That is a teleos and a design statement as well. So I think in order to get to where you're at from the Christian worldview, if you were to assume that Christianity is true, you'd have to find within the text of Scripture where these particular statements are made
Um,
about creation that they're not tied to uh, biology with the purview of community in hand.
I Connor, can I take a shot at this?
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely interested in your perspective on this.
Okay. Um, Dean, again, I don't want you to feel ganged up on, and you have your finger on the button.
No,
You can.
no, that's fine. You're good. Go for
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I'm
So
here. I'm here for all the pain.
yeah. Okay. So we understand that the way we treat people socially, right? It does not require us to know what their plumbing is downstairs, right? Like you don't need to know someone's bits unless you want to have sex with them, to treat them with decency and with kindness and generosity. And so, if we abolished the way that we like just looked at gender, right? Just like all of that. You don't think people's naughty bits will go away, right? Like you'd understand that their sex would still be intact. We just would not stereotype them and classify them in the same boxes, right?
Are you talking to me or Connor?
You.
Um, sorry, I was distracted. So you're saying
No worries.
if somebody, so if somebody's, you don't, yeah, I would agree that you don't, the sex of a person is still going to be intact. I agree with that.
Right. So regardless of the gender framing and the social aspect of it, you understand, right, that like there's no amount of redefining gender that's going to change, the plumbing on people, right?
In principle, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. So if we look biblically at the history of, uh, men and women and how people were segregated by sex, you have a history of women being treated as chattel, as being owned by their father until they are given from the father to become property of no longer the father, but of the husband, right? So you have a culture where women are deeply, deeply subjugated and stripped of human rights and treated as property in the same way that like cows and sheep are treated as property. So is that the source that we want to use we're coming to when we're talking about how to treat people based on their sex?
Okay. So I think there's two distinctions that need to be made here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between saying this is the category of persons based upon biology. That's one thing. A different thing is how one is treated based upon that particular biology that places them in a particular category. So I think
Sure. No, no,
you're
no.
And also,
I think
I think you're repeating back exactly what I think. I think so far we're on the same
well,
page.
I thought you were making the point that because of these particular things, I thought you were going into the area of, well, women were treated bad in the biblical time. I'm simply saying that whether women were treated good or bad in the biblical time or the biblical, in the
Oh,
biblical time frame, the ancient Near East, that says nothing to what they are biologically.
I entirely agree. I thought that you were referencing the Bible as a good resource for how we should treat people based on their sex.
No, I'm simply saying what I was trying to do when I was answering Connor was simply saying, um, to get to where Connor is with gender abolitionism, to be a gender abolitionist from a Christian worldview, is that you would have to show that these particular texts that talk about these particular categories are in their intention merely cultural norms
Oh,
and don't have a transcendent teleos attached to them. That was my only
could
point.
I
could I maybe give my perspective on it? I'm not
Sure.
nearly a Christian apologist, nor have I like read the Bible cover to cover.
I
But I guess like in my perspective of Christianity and gender in general, so like, and I guess it helps to talk about like what gender is, but gender is sort of like in my perspective, something like if a person is a woman, they're saying that they want to be perceived through the lens of a person who should act like a woman. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will do so, or like, because like someone can be like, yeah, I'm a woman, but I'm going to do none of what you would expect a quote unquote woman to do. Like, I have a boyfriend, loves wearing pink with long hair, right? And that doesn't make him any less of a man. But I guess like under Christianity, I would think it'd be more so pointing out like, does God have a specific way of acting for each sex that requires that, like, you know, like I'm sure that there probably are, but like, do women only wear dresses? If that's the case, then you would have to have the perspective that like anyone who wears a dress, you would point to that and be like, that is a woman. Anyone who wears pants is a man. Or like, if a man wears a dress, you would either be like, you can't wear that dress, you're a man, or you are a woman for wearing a dress. But like under like gender abolitionism in
Connor?
Christianity. Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. I want you to finish, and I hate to interrupt. But it sounds like we might be on speakerphone or something like that. We're getting feedback, and it's actually
I actually switched from speakerphone off of it, so I guess I'll turn it back on.
interesting. I did just want to let you know that there is feedback, and it is a little hard to hear because of that feedback.
How is it now?
So far, so good. Connor, go ahead though. You were you were responding.
Yeah, but I guess like from my perspective of what I know very little about the Bible, you know, females, for lack of a better term, because I guess I want to try to keep the gender terms as separate as possible. Females were taken from the rib of Adam, you know, the side, not the back of the ass. So they're not like automatically lesser, so they have an equal place. And I guess like from my perspective, I would just say that like perhaps God made man and woman in order to repopulate and to like didn't make us like germs, so we just split in half every time we want to have a kid. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that how we make babies should determine how we dress, how we act, how we decide to raise or lower our voice, or how we the toys we like to play with, you know, things like that, like your classic gendered behaviors. You know, I guess I'm curious on what you think the Bible has to say about not necessarily like does the Bible put sex expectations or gender expectations, and if there are sex expectations, then I suppose that it basically would. I guess I'll leave that up to you to kind of determine, because you know more about the Bible than me. But
Dean, what do you think?
So Connor, help me here. Do you think there's a distinct difference between sex expectations and gender expectations? If gender is not tied to sex, then my question is, would there be different expectations on your viewpoint? Because that matters to how I answer the question.
I think that sex expectations would be something that I mean, I'm not going to say you would only have it if you basically tie sex and gender into one category. I don't know what a sex expectation would look like under a purview of sex and gender being different. Like if there's gendered expectations, women do X, Y, Z, then I don't even know what I could talk about as like a female expectation. Females do X, Y, Z. But I guess
Connor, like, you're echoing again. Sorry.
Oh.
I know. We'll figure it out over time. Try taking us off a speakerphone. Let's see if that fixes it again.
Maybe we're good.
Possibly. But Dean, did you want to respond?
So I guess in the class of this question, the only thing that's really laid out biblically with regards to sex and gender is particularly in the confines of two areas. One would be the marriage relationship, and the other one would be you know, what God desires for humanity with regards to the use of our bodies, right? So in the way that we treat one another, also in the way that we act with regards to sexual ethics, and then the way in which husbands and wives are supposed to treat one another in the framework of marriage. So that's a general scope of where I think I can answer this particular question, right? I don't know if that does anything for you or not, Connor.
Well, and it actually, I think it kind of does, because I guess, so a question I would have, like, are those rules, like, marriage would be between, at the very least, seemingly a male and a female under the Christian purview, because it's kind of for like procreation, as my understanding. But for example, my boyfriend is a trans man, so you would like, he has the female bits. So would Christianity allow us to get married? And if we do get married, would he still have to behave as a wife? Or because we're both men, when it says like, oh, marriage is between a man and a woman, we can't get married. And if we did, he would have to behave as a wife? Or are we both acting as a husband in the marriage?
Man, I don't think that I have ever been asked that question before. And so
this is, sorry, I do want to just say one thing.
No,
this is where I think the difference between sex and gender.
I'm glad. Hold on one second, Connor. I'm glad that you've asked that question. You know, and to be fair, I don't want to be disingenuous to not just the question, but I don't want to be disingenuous to you and your partner either. So I think what I would say would be this, is that is something that's a difficult question to answer, just because I am not well versed in sex, gender, and identity, but I will give you where I'm at currently, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that your husband is a trans man.
We're not married yet, but if we were.
Oh, sorry. If you were.
Yeah.
So if you were married, the question becomes, is that if God exists and if we're made in his image, this is the question that I want you to answer. Who gets to decide what we do and how we identify ourselves with regards to our body and who we are?
I mean, I suppose the answer then would obviously be God, but I don't know what God has to say necessarily about gender. I don't think the Bible necessarily, I think due to when it was created, the idea of like gender and transgender people were kind of far out of everyone's minds in that respect.
Well, specifically in that culture, yes. I strongly disagree.
Well, I knew Eric is going to strongly disagree with that.
Yeah, but I want Connor to have the opportunity. Yeah, fair enough. Connor, go ahead.
I mean, I was saying, like granting the worldview, God makes all the decisions, or at least in terms of if you're talking about like wanting to get into heaven, like if I don't much care for that, then I would make the decision at the end of the day. But
right. Right. So go ahead, Eric. You've been chomping at the bit, I can tell.
I am, and I will also absolutely derail the conversation you two are having. I want you both to be able to have the opportunity to kind of finish this thought. Yeah.
I guess I did want to kind of maybe restate my question, because I don't know if it got particularly answered. Maybe it did. I'm a little antsy being on the phone.
No worries.
I'm antsy being on the call and answering the question, so we're both in the same boat.
Your face is on the screen. I couldn't do it.
standing.
I should not have my face on the screen doing
Well,
that.
and you also never know who's gonna call. Like we're there's a gamut. That's the risk of running a call-in show. So I applaud
So
Dean's candor.
real quick, let me answer Connor's question, Eric, and then
we can
you guys can skewer me later down the line. I would say that where I currently am, which is subject to change based upon information and education, is that in this particular situation, if you and your husband were to be married from the biblical perspective, all right, that marriage is strictly between a biological male
that doesn't say that
and
in
a
the Bible.
biological female, but that's what the words connotate based
Well,
upon Genesis chapter 1. And that's the framework by which hypothetically you were gonna were to be a Christian, that you would submit to what God says in those particular realms. Now, that doesn't discount at all anything with regards to, I'm not trying to discount anything regarding to one's lived experience or subjective view of self, but that's why worldviews matter,
yeah,
right? And how we approach those worldviews from within and without play into these types of conversations.
Yeah. Connor, I think I'm going to pick up from here if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm interested in hearing both perspectives. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think I'm going to drop the call for now, and that way it's not 2-on-1, because the last thing I want is Dean to have to fight a battle on two fronts. But I think I can pick this up. All right. Thank you, Connor. Okay. So here's my question. The question is, Dean, are you still there? Okay, sorry. You were so still. I thought you froze again. I got nervous. Okay. So the question is, I want to hypothetically take this on from a position that is consistent with Christianity, right? I don't want you to feel like you're needing to defend all of Christianity. I want you to feel comfortable talking about your Christianity. You know what I mean? You're not Mormon. You shouldn't speak on behalf of Mormons. You're not Catholic. You shouldn't speak on behalf of Catholics or Muslims or anything like that. So I'm going to reframe this just a little bit, right? Does God advocate which sports team you should support? You're muted.
No.
No, of course not. What about what political party you should vote for?
No.
No. Okay. Does God advocate what kind of clothing you should wear?
To a certain extent, yes.
Yeah, if you want to get into Levitical law, right? We can,
or even New Testament, yeah.
So, okay, so we understand that there are things that are going on in this world, how we treat each other socially, that have nothing to do with God, right? Like what sports team you support has nothing to do with your faith.
I would agree.
Right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay,
yeah.
So now let's apply that when it comes to gender, just a little bit, right?
Okay.
So the one man, one woman, I believe a Christian interpretation could very easily be that it was described that people ought to have kids, that they ought to be fruitful and multiply, and that people who have, different sets of bits that can have a kid should do that. Right? So if we took that viewpoint, though, as an ought statement, we ought to socially, push that, then I think that we should annul the marriages of people who cannot have children. But I think that's kind of cruel, and I think you probably do too, yeah?
Yeah, I would say that would be cruel. I would also say that marriage isn't just for the purpose of procreation, as is not only at least described in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, but also in 1 Corinthians 7 with Paul.
Well, in Genesis, God talks about there are a lot of things in there that are not factual, and they can be, even for a Christian, metaphorical. Right? Was the earth created in 7 literal days? That was in Genesis 1. Right? Was Adam created from dust, literally? Right? Was Eve created from a rib, literally? All of these stories, right? You have the very first people who came in Eden, right? You have Adam and Eve, but as soon as they left, you have an entire other group of people across the river in Nod who apparently were there too. But like, so if we're talking about Genesis 1 and we're pointing to that as a resource, then we already, I think, have a reason to go, okay, some of this can be analogy, some of this can be metaphor. It doesn't need to be perfect and true and literal. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, I see that there are Christians who would take that
Ken
particular
Ham
stance about fruitful.
answers in Genesis, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to throw anybody's name out there in case I got found.
Well, I think that being the Christian who says, hey, there's nuance there and conversations that should be had, I think is pretty freaking awesome.
Sure. No, I'd agree.
So I think with that said, there's plenty of wiggle room there to look at that verse and go, what is being talked about is specifically having lots of kids, or at least having kids. People ought to procreate. And if we're taking that and applying that to marriage, I think that if we're saying ought statements, then we ought to annul the marriages of people who can't have children.
I see what you're saying. I think that what you're trying. I'm not gonna.
No. Come on. Do it. Give me.
I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to take this one section in Genesis and where it says "be fruitful and multiply," and simply say, well, hey, it says "be fruitful and multiply" right here, and therefore, like that's the only thing that entails the purpose of marriage, and then you're applying that to all marriages and saying, well, then we should just annul that, when Scripture says a lot about what marriage is outside of just
you're right,
just having babies.
You're right.
There's a particular in the context of Genesis 1, there's a particular purpose for that statement that is being made in Genesis chapter 1.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that what could be pointed out there is that it's simply trying to explain the difference of why we have different bits, and not necessarily an ought statement about how we ought to treat each other, or how we ought to act in a marriage. The reason I pointed towards marriage is because instead of saying the is statement, I was trying to find an ought there, right? And how we treat each other socially. The marriage bit was the first thing to pop into mind for me of, okay, how we ought to treat people based on their sex, socially, right? Like I'm trying to reach those and find it and separate those things from each other. So I guess the piece there is I have come to a conclusion that even Christians can look at those verses and go, hey, there's really no reason socially for us to distinguish, people based on their bits. But like, if we're talking about biology, then I think I think our morality has evolved beyond what the writers of the Bible thought about. I think we're better to women. We don't have slaves, and we don't go to war with the ferocity of the conquest of Canaan. And I think those are all good things. So we can have a more nuanced conversation. What's up?
No, I was gonna say the quiet part out loud, but I'll refrain that for another time on
Was the quiet
slaves
part
in the
out loud?
conquest of slaves. Well, I mean, I think you made a massive leap. We were talking about particular views of sex and gender, and then you kind of went off on the tangent of,
Yeah.
well,
I was referencing using the Old Testament as a prescription for how we ought to
sure.
treat each other.
And we can man, this is gonna be so much fun once a month having this conversation, because I totally we don't have I don't know that we have time
I know
now
I'm
because we still
getting
got
way.
callers,
Yeah.
but we definitely need to have
Gosh, Dean,
that open mic night.
we need
So
to.
um so real quick, what I don't know, what's the time frame for how long our show normally runs? I know I'm asking that live, but
So
it's okay.
it usually runs 2 hours. So we've got a half hour left and 2 more callers.
Okay, let's go with
Let's do it.
Chris.
All right.
Chris, he,
Dean, are you
him
keeping
from
us on
Scotland.
track? I appreciate it,
There you
brother.
go. There you go, Chris.
I just want you all to myself. That's the problem. Chris, you're live
There
on
you
the
go.
show.
Hello there.
Hello. What's on your mind? What's going on, Chris?
Oh well, sitting watching listening to the conversation around sex and gender, I have a few things that I'm tempted to ask about, but I think I'll just sort of go with something a bit more basic and sort of just ask Dean what his background is and what he believes as a Christian regarding for example, Dean, are you a Christian in the sense that you believe in a sort of a God and sort of a non-interventionist God who created the universe, but isn't necessarily as related to the Bible as, for example, some other Christians might? Or are you sort of more down the line of anti-evolution, or all this stuff? I'm just sort of curious to what
Great.
extent you
Chris,
believe the Bible.
Chris is gonna get me shunned. No, I'm just kidding.
Dean,
Chris, once again, thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
I'm
You're
going to
very
cut.
welcome.
One of the places that I actually want to visit when I grow up is Edinburgh. I hear it's amazing there. So Chris,
It is.
my background, it says in the caller screen that what's my background and belief and why do I believe in the Christian God specifically? So
Indeed.
I think so. So I make my Christianity fairly basic, right? In the sense that, uh, that it comes down to one specific question for me, right? Is, did Jesus rise from the grave or not? So, in having conversations about evolution, right? You'd mentioned that, or age of the earth, or those kind of peripheral but important conversations. Um,
Indeed.
I I have an opinion about those particular things, but I don't think that those particular things are scrapping over, if that makes sense to you. So
I
like
totally
if somebody
understand.
so for me, if um if if the Bible teaches that for me to be saved, that I need to, make Jesus my Lord and Savior, and that's like what it is, then I don't think something like the age of the earth, whether I'm old earth or young earth, needs to be something that I de-Christianize somebody over, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like my
Yeah, I get
background.
that.
I I make that particularly. I'm like, I don't like go around announcing that. Like if you're an old earther or a young earther, like you're not a Christian. But for me, the question is, if Jesus rose from the grave and the earth is old, is Christianity true? If Jesus rose from the grave and the earth is young, is Christianity true? Well,
Hmm.
the answer to both of those is yeah, Christianity is true if Jesus rose from the grave.
That's fascinating. So, regarding the idea that Jesus rose from the grave, What is it that got you to the point where you sort of believe that? I appreciate obviously what we believe and don't believe isn't always a matter of choice. What is it that sort of makes you believe that Jesus rose from the dead?
Yeah, so great, great question. But does that kind of give you my background on like the evolution stuff real quick before I
Absolutely
answer
does.
this?
Yeah, I was just
Cool.
using evolution as an example
No, oh,
of
okay,
how
gotcha.
sort of what the extent
Yeah,
of the extent to which you sort of go into all that stuff.
I feel like you teed up the question Dean has been waiting his life for. He's so ready.
no. So I think I just, I'm not one of the people, Chris, where I believe that Jesus rose from the grave just because it was preached to me on Sunday morning growing up. I don't think that Jesus rose from the grave just because, um, I read my Bible growing up. I don't think that Jesus rose from the grave just because I went to summer camp and got a warm and fuzzy uh, because, it was interactive, engaging, and the music was great. All right.
Yeah,
I, I, now some people may believe that. That's just not me. I actually think that it's true. I think that it's a genuine, authentic historical event.
I see. Why do you think that?
Yeah. So, sorry. So I think that because I think there's good historical evidence for it. When you look at a couple of ancient ancient pieces of evidence. So, for instance, something like the creed that is in 1 Corinthians 15
Is that the
that
Nicene Creed?
mention.
Yeah.
Say again.
Is that the Nicene Creed you're talking about? Yeah.
No, not the Nicene Creed. That comes well after the creed that's in 1 Corinthians 15. I don't have my
I see.
Bible with me, but I would say something like that. I would say something like the poem or creed that's at the beginning of Romans chapter 1. Those particular creeds, Paul's writings predate the Gospels. Okay. So in those writings, there are these creeds that um, predate the writing of Paul that he utilizes to make his point. And so the question becomes not what's necessarily the date of Paul's writings. The question is what's the particular date of this particular creed, but also why does that particular creed exist? Does that make sense, Chris?
It does, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I have a creed, and this is like 1 Corinthians 15 seems to be something that scholars like um, Gerd Ludemann would say is early. Who else? What's the other lady's
I
name? I forget it. Fredrickson, I think, is one. They say that, the nature of the creed seems like it's within, a decade and a half of Jesus's death. So the question becomes,
yeah,
so the
that's
question
entirely untrue,
becomes,
but okay. Sorry.
do what?
I disagree. We'll argue later.
That's fine. So the question becomes, if the creed exists early, um, then why does that creed exist so early and so close to the time of death? Well, I think there are a couple of answers uh, that are on the table. One, everybody's just lying. Uh, Two, the event took place, and then three would be people were deceived and they just got it wrong based upon their being deceived. Right? I think those are at least three options that are on the table. And so I take the particular view that I don't think people were lying. I don't think that they were deceived. I think there was an uh, actual event given the closeness of the creed to the time of Jesus's death, but also things like the witness of the Gospels. I also think the empty tomb would be a good piece of evidence for that. And I think Paul's conversion and James's conversion are also good pieces of historical evidence that point to the resurrection being more probably true than not.
That is an interesting one. I suppose I'm just trying to work out where to come at this from. Ultimately, we can't necessarily tell that the tomb was empty. We're sort of taking it on faith from the what we read that the tomb was empty. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to believe that there was an apocalyptic preacher at that time. I don't necessarily believe his name was Jesus, because from what I understand, the letter J, as it is now, didn't actually exist then. I mean, perhaps it was Yeshua or something, but just because someone writes about something, I struggle to see how that necessarily makes it true. And from what I understand, the Gospels weren't actually written necessarily by the apostles, from what I know, and I might be wrong. I dare say you and Eric might know a decent amount more than I do about the matter, but
Eric and I are going to vastly disagree on
this. It's just a matter of church tradition that they're named after the gospel. That they're named as though it's the gospel, the apostles.
Yeah. So real quick, Chris, did I hear you correctly? And did you say that you didn't think Jesus was a historical person?
I'm willing to believe that someone who was going around preaching the same things as Jesus might have existed. I don't have a massive issue with that. Okay. I don't necessarily believe their name was Jesus, because linguistically, I don't actually, and I might be wrong, I don't actually think the letter J as we use it now existed at the time that Jesus. My dispute is mostly with the name. I'm happy to believe that there's a guy who went around preaching this stuff and had some followers, and even potentially that he got killed as a result of speaking against the powers that be at the time. Okay. I struggle to see, even if someone writes that, I struggle to sort of make that come together with the idea that he rose from the dead.
Right. So I agree with you that just because somebody writes it, don't make it necessarily true. Like we see that all the time and with government reports, right? That just because somebody writes it doesn't mean that it's true. So I'm completely on board with you when it comes to that just because these people wrote it 2,000 years ago doesn't mean that it's true. Just because somebody writes about what Alexander did or didn't do, or what Caesar did or didn't do, doesn't make it true. So you have to do a historical investigation and ask yourself, are the sources that we have good sources for believing that this particular event in history is more likely or less likely to be true, right? So I'm with you on that point. With regards to the writings of the Gospels, let me ask you this question. This might be a unique question.
Okay.
Does it matter whether or not those Gospels were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John for them to be historical?
That is an interesting one. I would say that the fact that it wasn't written by the people that it's claimed to be written by, I would say that at the very least sheds some sort of doubt on it, because it makes it then difficult to know who the source is or what their potential bias is. And I'm not necessarily even saying that they're lying, but people believe in, people think they've met Bigfoot and got, met aliens and things like that. But equally, that doesn't make it true. They might not be lying. They might well believe it, but that doesn't necessarily make it true.
Okay. But a name not being on a manuscript doesn't necessarily make it false either, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make it automatically false.
So my point would be this. One, I think the best evidence is that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So my point would be the following with regards to the authorship of these particular documents, whether they're Pauline or whether they're the Gospels. The question becomes, if you say that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not the authors of the Gospels, yet the manuscript evidence that we do have that names are attached to them, those are the only 4 names that show up. What would it take from an evidentiary standpoint to say, well, the early manuscripts don't have names on them. The manuscripts that we do have by the thousands have their names on them. What would it take from an evidentiary standpoint for you to say, okay, these are probably not the names or not the authors of these particular gospels?
So just to understand you a little bit there, are you saying what would it take for me to believe that they aren't the authors?
Yeah. So my point is this: if you have thousands of manuscripts in the manuscript evidence, in which these names are either attached or ascribed to these particular documents, and they're the only ones that are attached or ascribed to these particular documents, what good reason do you have to believe, or what good reason would you think could be presented to say, no, these aren't the authors?
Well, my understanding, again, I might be wrong, is that some of these documents date to well after Jesus was supposedly killed. Like longer than you would expect, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John to really live. Again, I might be wrong about it, but that's my understanding.
I would say that it's a debate for sure, with regards to some of the dating of these. But my question, so you're saying that one of the things that you could present would be, well, what are the dates of the documents, right? If the documents date to 200 AD, well, then obviously Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wouldn't have written those. They'd be 100 and whatever years old. I'm no mathematician. Go ahead, Eric. Do you have something, or are you okay if I continue talking to Chris?
So I do I do know we have one more caller in 12 minutes, and I do want to pipe in a little bit, and I also don't want to steal your thunder. So I just want to kind of put you know how they do at the boxing when they do the tack, tack, tack,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, go ahead. I want you to finish.
So I think you're right. I think if you could show that these documents are older, I think you've got a great case for them not being Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't know that is necessarily a knockdown, drag out for undercutting the historicity of the event. There certainly are events that have been recorded after the fact, maybe even well after the fact, that would be historical. Furthermore, I would say, you mentioned can we switch real quick to the tomb, because I know we've got a little bit of time left, and we got one caller. Is that okay, Chris?
Yeah, of course. But listen, I hope you have a nice day, and it was nice. It was nice chatting with you.
Well, no, I was going to say,
nice
Chris,
talking to you as well,
I was
Eric.
wanting to, yeah, I was wanting to just make a reference to the empty tomb. Why do you think that we can't trust that the empty tomb wasn't empty? Real quick.
I suppose that it would depend on who says that it's empty and whether they have a bias. And I would argue that even if it was the apostles that wrote all of these things, I would argue that they might either be biased, or that there might be a political motivation, or that they genuinely, yeah.
Okay. Chris, will you do me a favor?
Yeah, of course.
Next month, will you call in so that we can talk about the empty tomb and finish the conversation about the Gospels?
Yeah, by all means. I'm really interested on sort of why it is you believe what you believe. It's genuinely quite interesting.
Well, I appreciate that, Chris. And you've been a great caller, and you have upheld the tradition of Scottish people being extremely kind.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, pal.
Take
Have
care,
an
brother.
amazing night.
You
Thanks.
too.
Take care, Chris.
Thanks.
Okay. I just want to say, and by the way, any clarifications I make, I want you to be able to jump into. This is not just an Eric thing, okay? I want this to be a Dean thing too. But I'd like something being historical doesn't make it true, right? Like we can look at the Iliad and say that's a historical document, right? We can look at Shakespeare and go, hey, those are historical plays. It doesn't make it true. It just makes it historical. So I want to though be generous and grant. Let's say all of a lot of this is true, right? I want to be in the Christian canon for my response to you for just a second. Okay. So I pulled up the First Corinthians Creed because I wanted to read it myself. I wanted the context of what you were saying, right?
Yeah.
He says, "Now I make known to you, brethren, the gospel which I preached to you." Right? This is Paul writing to the Corinthians. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, according to Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day. He appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then after that to the 500. And then he appeared to James and the apostles, right? That's the essentially First Corinthian Creed, right? Okay, so that was written by Paul.
Yeah.
Was Paul an apostle?
Yeah.
No.
He was.
Oh, no, sorry. No, he
What are you talking
wasn't.
about?
Paul was not.
Paul was an apostle.
No, Paul did not follow Jesus. Paul was not there for the life of Jesus. Paul only saw Jesus on the road to Damascus. Paul originally went by Saul, who persecuted early Christians, but
Prior
was
to his
road to Damascus,
conversion, he was a
which happened
persecutor.
after
Right.
Jesus died. He only spiritually interacted with Jesus, but he wasn't there at the death. He wasn't there at the tomb. He wasn't appeared to by Jesus, following the following the resurrection events. It was a different event that happened afterwards. So the person writing this creed was not there for any of it. He had his own Jesus experience, right?
So, a couple points of clarification.
Yeah.
Paul, throughout the New Testament, even Acts, which isn't written by Paul, or even when he does write, he clearly gets the right hand of fellowship from the apostles in Galatians chapter 1, and also, he opposes Peter in Galatians chapter 2, but he clearly is identified as an apostle.
Sure.
In the sense that the qualification for being an apostle is either to be with Jesus or his ministry, or have an interaction with Jesus, post or have seen the risen Jesus. Now, there can certainly be a conversation, and we've got not much time to go tit for tat about whether or not this was a spiritual experience, or if he actually saw the body of the resurrected Jesus. Now, to your point about him writing the creed, my point is not that Paul was there to write the creed.
I'm even if I granted that it was written by Paul in Paul's hand, what I'm just saying is that if we're going to look at the truth value of it, we need to take into context this is somebody who was not there firsthand. This is not a firsthand account. This is a secondhand account, right? At best. And then if we want to pretend, and I'm willing to grant, okay, let's for the moment say that the Gospels were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Let's just say that they were. Was Luke a follower of Jesus during his lifetime? Was he there for the death and resurrection of Christ?
But no, he wasn't.
No,
but
Luke was a follower of Paul, right?
Luke was an associated companion of Paul on his missionary journeys. Cool. Yeah.
So the interesting thing is, like, biblical historians point to Luke as being one of the earliest gospels that was written. Right?
Sure.
Yeah. And so that goes along with Mark as well. So these earliest gospels were written by people well after the fact, after Jesus had died, who were not there. And then we look at the scriptures that were written by, according to you, people who were there, right? So like John, and Matthew, who, by
Okay.
the way, according to Christian theologians, cribbed their notes from Mark and Luke. So they could have only come afterward. So all I'm saying is that it feels like the sources either weren't there or cribbed their notes from people who weren't there.
Okay, so in response to that, Luke certainly opens up his gospel and says, like, I'm consulting sources for this to give an orderly account about what took place with Jesus. So Luke opens up and says, yeah, I mean, essentially he's admitting that he wasn't there for the ministry of Jesus, that he is consulting sources with regards to the things that Jesus said and did for a particular purpose. And as far as like cribbing notes, in each particular gospel, there are things, especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And as far as cribbing notes goes, sure, is it probable that these particular authors borrowed things from one another and utilized it for the purpose of their gospel? Sure. That's just how writing in antiquity worked.
Yeah.
But there are also things within each of those gospels that are unique to those gospels that are not found in the other two gospels. And so it's not as if Matthew, Mark, Luke, cribbed notes from one another, and there's nothing unique in it or in and of Luke that distinguishes it from the other gospels that they would have supposedly taken notes from, would be my point. So I don't think borrowing notes in the way that they borrowed notes in antiquity does anything to undermine the uniqueness of the Gospels as their own sources for what took place in the life of Jesus.
Fair. I just think that viewing something historically understood, great, but if we're viewing the truth of a thing, and wanting to know whether or not it actually happened, then knowing whether or not the author was there should be taken into account. That's all. That said,
Sure.
We have 2 minutes left on air. It is so not enough time to talk to Herbert. Heriberto in Pennsylvania.
Sorry, Herbert.
Hey, Herbert.
Hey, guys.
Hey, can we get you to call in next time?
Good morning, good afternoon.
Hey, you waited for so long, and it is so not fair that we didn't get to your call, and I apologize. Can we get you to call back in?
That's okay.
When Dean's
on?
on?
Yeah, if it's okay, could I cue Dean up for what my question will be, and we'll talk the next time he's on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, let's do it. What's the question?
So, first of all, Dean, I want to preface this that I'm not asking you because you're a Christian. I ask this of anybody who has a hard position on a belief or a non-belief system. So asking you as a Christian, my question will be, why does Christianity and Christian leaders refuse to clean up the corruption inside of Christianity?
No, that's a great question. I've asked that myself oftentimes.
I feel like if more people were like Dean, it would be better. And I can't wait to see Dean respond to that. Dean, I do got to tell you that Herbert has historically held my feet to the fire. And so in no way is Herbert being unique in this. And Herbert, that makes me appreciate you so much. So I really look forward to the conversation. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah,
no doubt.
I look forward to talking to you guys. Have a good week, and we'll talk soon.
Perfect.
Sounds good, man.
Take care. So I know that you're a dad, and I know that you've got like responsibilities and things that you need to tend to, and so I can't keep you forever, even though I wish I could. Because of that, I know. So I don't think we'll be able to do an after show, just because I know that you got to go. But we are going to be busy, right? You're going to be coming to Portland before you're on again next month.
I'll be in Portland the 8th through the 14th, and just to let everybody know what we're doing, we're having some college kids roll up to Portland, and Eric and Atticus will be joining us as we engage and learn about the LGBTQ plus community, so that we have a better understanding and a better way to navigate actually humanizing people from a Christian community to the LGBTQ plus community and have these conversations like we had today about sex, gender, and identity in a
That
in a
is so
constructive,
appropriate, isn't it?
non-stereotypical way. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that time, man, and to see you and to have that experience for sure.
I absolutely love it. Yeah, I'm going to be representing the B, bisexual, and LGBT, and Atticus is going to be representing the T and LGBT, and I am super, super excited. Dean, how do you feel after our first episode?
I love it. This is awesome. This is a great
Yeah.
experience. Thank you for inviting me to host. Thank you for the callers who are so considerate and so nice. And we're not just on here yelling at each other. We're having constructive conversations. We're pressing each other back and forth. And there are times where it's okay to just look at somebody who's asked a really good question and say, hey, great question. I don't know.
Let's
So
look. Yeah.
it's been an amazing experience. And I just want to thank everybody out there watching the show.
I know that there are a few times where I blurted out and it felt bad. I want to make sure that in time that we're spending together, you have your chances and your opportunities, and that I don't step on that. And I think that's something.
Well, you've been
muscle that I'm
gracious
going to need to flex.
with not doing that. You've been
I
really
did
gracious.
I did
with
it a
just
few
allowing
times
me
though.
to ramble and talk.
No, you're good. And keeping each other, on track and moving things forward felt really, really good. I'm really, really hopeful for our time together. And my gosh, do I just want to spend more time hanging out with you. You're such a good friend.
I just same. So
yeah, no, you're good. All right. So, hey, everybody, if you like the show and you want to support it, costs do happen. If you want to help make sure that this can keep going, consider going to patreon.com/skeptic generation. That's patreon.com/skeptic generation. Also, leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified when we're going to be going live and when we're going to be putting out clips. All of that really, really helps to make sure that the show grows and gets noticed. Dean, I'm hoping over time I'll get some Christian callers who are going to grill me too, because I felt like your feet were to the fire the entire episode, and I did not get challenged very much, and that feels
it's all good.
One-sided, and that's not fair, but hopefully we'll get to that point. Dean, do you have anything you want to plug before we round things up for the day? Oh, you're muted. You look so earnest and what I.
Well, at some point, I just want to say, plug the show, tell people to, tune in, watch, like, subscribe, share, Patreon, all that stuff. But also, I just want to say that I think this is a really unique framework for conversation. You've got people from different expertise levels coming in and having conversations about a variety of different subjects. And hopefully one of these days I can meet the other amazing people that are a part of this thing called Skeptic Generation. So kudos to you, kudos to the idea. And this is very unique.
Yeah,
in this stream of YouTube podcasts and stuff.
You had a number of callers who were not from the United States and not even atheist or Christian, just like very different. And
I've never met Atheo-Pagan before. So
right.
There you go. That was awesome.
Atheo-Pagan is an absolute sweetheart. So people are asking about an after show. I'm probably going to drop in for a bit, but I know, Dean, you've got to head out. Maybe at some point we'll get you dialed in so that you can join. Usually to end the show, I don't know if you know our closing line, but when we try and say it at the same time with a delay, it's the worst.
Okay.
So when V and I did the show, it was, hey, I'm Eric, I'm V, this was Skeptic Generation, and we're glad we had this talk. And so I feel like maybe we can take turns with it. So like I say, I'm Eric, you say you're Dean, I say this is Skeptic Generation, you say we're glad we had this talk. How's that sound?
So we can definitely try it.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Until next time, I'm Eric.
I'm Dean.
This was Skeptic Generation.
I'm glad we had this talk.